Hey there, adventurers! If you're enjoying the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our amazing community. Don't forget to leave a like if this story hooked you, and be sure to activate the bell so you never miss a new episode. Thanks for watching, and let's keep exploring together. Chapter 3: The War Room. The war room was filled with a quiet, oppressive tension. Every corner of the room was occupied by military officers, strategists, and analysts, all veterans of a war they hadn't expected to fight. Yet despite their rank and experience, there was an unmistakable sense of dread hanging over them. The weight of their recent losses, the fall of Mars, the destruction of the lunar colonies, was a heavy burden on everyone's shoulders. At the center of the room stood Admiral Reynolds, his weathered face hardened by the weeks of devastation that had ravaged humanity's colonies. Once a place of strategy and planning, where victory seemed within reach, the war room now felt like a tomb. Every decision made here would determine whether humanity survived or perished, and that responsibility was suffocating. Around him, holographic displays flickered with star maps and projections. They showed the solar system in brutal detail. Earth, still untouched but vulnerable, surrounded by markers of destruction. Red symbols representing Khardaani fleets clustered ominously near the asteroid belt, advancing slowly but surely toward the inner system. Green dots, signifying the remains of humanity's defense forces, were sparse and scattered. Every green light that disappeared signaled the end of another ship, another crew lost to the merciless enemy. Reynolds' eyes lingered on the red markers, particularly on the cluster that represented the Khardaani fleet that had crossed into the inner solar system. He had watched those ships cross the asteroid belt, their numbers so vast that they blotted out the stars. They moved with a terrifying precision, cutting through the void like a scythe through grain. The Khardaani were not here to conquer, they were here to exterminate. The memory of that moment had haunted Reynolds since the day it happened. He remembered standing on the bridge of his command ship, watching as thousands of Khardaani warships darkened the light of the sun. Their shadows fell over the shattered remains of Mars and the moon, and with them, hope seemed to fade. In that moment, it felt like the light itself had been snuffed out. They didn't come to conquer, Reynolds thought. They came to erase us. As he stared at the holographic display, he couldn't shake the weight of survivor's guilt that clung to him. He had been there, on the front lines, as Mars fell. He had given the orders, made the calls that sent countless soldiers to their deaths. Every colony that had been destroyed, every ship that had been lost, it all felt like a personal failure. He had been entrusted with the defense of humanity, and now their entire civilization teetered on the brink of annihilation. His mind wandered to the soldiers he had commanded, many of whom were now dead. The men and women who had followed his orders without question, trusting that their sacrifices would mean something. But as the losses mounted, Reynolds couldn't help but wonder if their sacrifices would be in vain. Would there even be anyone left to remember them when this war was over? Or would their names fade into obscurity, forgotten in the wake of the Khardaani's unstoppable advance? And then there was the Council. The betrayal of the Galactic Council was a wound that still festered in his mind. He remembered the desperate pleas for aid, the messages sent to the Council's elder races, begging for reinforcements, for anything that could turn the tide of battle. Every message had gone unanswered. The Council, terrified of the Khardaani, had abandoned humanity to its fate. They had made their choice, to sit in their ivory towers, watching from the safety of their distant worlds, while humanity burned. Reynolds could imagine them now, those elder species, seated in their grand chambers, watching the war unfold in cold silence. They had once promised unity and cooperation, but when the time came to stand together, they had turned their backs. They had chosen cowardice, hoping that by sacrificing humanity, they could save themselves. They gave us to the wolves, Reynolds thought bitterly, and they watched as we were torn apart. The betrayal stung deeply. Once, Reynolds had admired the Council. He had seen them as the guiding shepherds of the galaxy, beings of immense wisdom and power. Now he saw them for what they truly were, cowards, hiding behind their ancient legacies, hoping the Khardaani would spare them. He resented them with every fiber of his being, But even as the anger swelled within him, he knew he couldn't afford to let it consume him. His focus had to remain on the task at hand. The survival of humanity depended on it. Around him, the officers and strategists murmured amongst themselves, their voices low and uncertain. The fear was palpable. Many of them had begun to crack under the pressure. Some whispered of retreat, of fortifying Earth's defenses and hoping that, perhaps, the Khardaani would stop once they had taken Mars and the lunar colonies. There was doubt in their eyes, doubt that humanity could stand against the overwhelming force that was bearing down on them. The devastation of the colonies had shaken everyone to their core. For weeks, they had been on the defensive, watching helplessly as the Khardaani tore through their defenses with brutal efficiency. The losses had been staggering, and now even the most hardened officers were questioning whether this war could be won at all. They looked to Reynolds for leadership, for some sign that victory was still possible, but he could see the fear in their eyes. Sensing the growing despair, Reynolds stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room's murmurs like a blade. "We do not retreat," he said firmly. Every pair of eyes in the room turned to him. "Earth is our last stronghold. There is nowhere else to run. If we fall here, humanity falls with us." The room fell silent, his words sinking in. "We stand and fight," Reynolds continued, his tone unwavering. "We fight with everything we have. We fight for our home, for our people, for every life lost on Mars and the lunar colonies. We stand together or we fall together, but we do not yield." His voice carried a weight that seemed to lift the officers out of their despair. The doubt that had clouded their judgment began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. They had no choice but to fight, they understood that now. The war was not just about survival, it was about defiance. Earth was their last bastion, and they would defend it with everything they had. The decision was made. They would regroup at Earth. Every ship, every soldier, every resource would be brought back to their homeworld. There would be no retreat, no surrender. Earth would become a fortress, and they would make their last stand here. The war room shifted from a place of fear to one of purpose. Officers began issuing orders. Ships were recalled, defensive positions prepared, and the call for every available force to return to Earth was sent out across the remaining human colonies. The scattered remnants of humanity's fleets would converge on their homeworld and make their stand. Reynolds knew it was a desperate plan. The Khardaani outnumbered them tenfold. Their technology was far more advanced, their fleets seemingly invincible, but there was no other option. This was not a battle for territory or resources, this was a battle for the survival of their species. They would fight to the last man if necessary. As the orders were given, Reynolds remained still, his eyes fixed on the flickering holographic map. He could see the Khardaani fleet inching closer, the red symbols inching ever nearer to Earth. But there was something else in his gaze now, something other than fear or regret. "They think we are broken," he muttered to himself. "They think we are weak, but they will learn that we are not prey." He took a deep breath, his resolve solidifying like iron. The Khardaani had underestimated humanity. They had thought the war would be over quickly, that humanity would fold as so many other civilizations had before them, but they had made a fatal mistake. "We are not prey," Reynolds said quietly. "We are warriors." Around him, the war room buzzed with activity. Ships were being mobilized, supplies gathered, and defenses fortified. The officers, once gripped by fear, now moved with a sense of purpose. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew that they had no other choice. This was it, the final stand. The battle that would decide the fate of their world. And they would not go quietly into the night.